So, Heather, in the last hour, we were talking about a piece that you wrote in Salon about the cries of the left wing mob, and we are 3 weeks out, and these cries obviously are coming. They're coming from Republican senators, but it's really across the board. I mean, this is the talking points that they're using at the moment. And this is all about the midterm elections. And there's huge stakes in these midterm elections in a way that I don't know that we've seen, frankly. I mean, you and I have been doing this, for we're well into our second decade of doing this, or I should say, at least for a couple of over the course of two different decades. Let's put it that way. And I don't know if there's been a midterm elections that I think is as consequential as this, because in addition to sort of empowering the worst elements of our society, in addition to empowering the Republicans and being a validation of Donald Trump if the Democrats can't seem to take over the House at the very least. There's all this lack of accountability. And, these midterms are going to decide, do we have Democratic governors in a half dozen states across the country that are so crucial when we get to the census? I mean, there's so many things on the line here. And you had written about this a left wing mob play. The Republicans want to keep this on a culture war footing. And part of the problem they have is because there's been some very ominous economic news. I mean, the economy, if you get far enough away from it, looks like it's doing better. Still on the trajectory that Obama set. We know that wages have been not have been particularly stagnant, that the quality of jobs that are being produced are bad, but people really do care about health care, wanting to improve on the Affordable Care Act. We have a lot of Democrats running on Medicare for all, which seems like a fairly obvious thing to do, both from a political and policy standpoint. And so the Republicans have a problem, and they have a problem even with their suburban voters, the ones who just care about things like, had been raised on a belief that they should care about the deficit. And now they're wondering, hey, wait a second. We were told if you made these corporate tax cuts that we would see the deficit close and tax revenues go up. But the opposite has happened, just like it happened in Kansas. If you cut taxes, guess what? You cut taxes. It doesn't magically make more revenue. And so Mitch McConnell has to deal with the deficit, and he's doing it in a way that I think we all anticipated the Republicans would. We just thought that maybe they would wait another couple of months.
Well, it's very interesting. I mean, normally tax cuts are just generally pretty popular. I mean, it's not something people don't like, right? I mean, even if you just get a couple bucks extra, you're going to go, well, it's better than nothing, right? But these tax cuts that they put through are not popular. That, in fact, they're unpopular, and they're so unpopular that the Republicans can't run on it. It was actually hurting them in their polling, so they've stopped running on their. It's their only legislative achievement, if you want to call it that, that they have. It's the one where they all stood on the steps of the Capitol, and they all grinned and glad-handed and cheered Donald Trump and called him a genius and all this stuff. I mean, and it is lethal to them. And so I think, there is a sense that maybe their shtick is not working anymore in a lot of ways. I mean, this economy should be enough for them to win, or at least do better. And certainly Donald Trump's approval rating should be higher. But the problem is that I think, people have come to sort of see what the scam is. Now, maybe I'm being too optimistic here, but I mean, this is a con that they have run for nearly 30 years, which is that they run up deficits with huge military spending and tax cuts for wealthy and corporations. Then they end up, screwing the pooch in some way, and they end up losing the White House and often, the one or more houses of Congress. At that point, they turn around and start screaming about deficits in an attempt to force the Democrats to cut spending. And by spending, they almost always mean the signature programs of the Democratic Party, which are the safety net programs. Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and now undoubtedly the Affordable Care Act is part of that too. So that is their method of trying to, at the very least, contain Democrats from trying to do anything more to help people like Medicare for All. And at most, hopefully get them on board to try and to start cutting these social welfare programs, the big ones that are across the board. And, they've actually had some success in some ways. I mean, Bill Clinton talked about privatizing Social Security at one point. Yeah. Barack Obama put cutting Social Security on the agenda as part of his grand bargain. And each time it didn't go through for a variety of reasons, mostly because Republicans wouldn't take yes for an answer. But it's a weapon that they have deployed over and over again. And so one of the reasons why they do these big tax breaks, aside from rewarding their big donors and corporate sponsors, is to put the Democrats in this kind of a bind where they are stuck, as they inevitably will be, because, maybe in this case they actually knew Donald Trump was, hardly going to be a successful president otherwise, that they would stick the Democrats with this big bill. And then they would have to be in this position of, talking about cutting programs again. You can already see it happening. And the media, by the way, are the worst enablers of this scam because they love to sit around and talk about how, the people really need to understand they've got to tighten their belts and take their medicine and we can't afford it and they need to sacrifice and, all this stuff. These rich celebrities on television sit there and lecture the American people about how they have to give up Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. So they help the Republicans every time. And I saw it just happen this week when Mitch McConnell came out with his comments that said, well, when asked about this soaring deficit, which, a deficit hawk like him should have been appalled by, and he said, well, it's not a Republican problem. It's a bipartisan problem driven by entitlements, right? So, I mean, this is, and the media just jumped on it. Well,
did we raise the Social Security benefits and Medicare benefits by 17% in the past year? I mean, it's, it's absurd talking point, but that's what it would mean.
Yeah. I mean, that's exactly what it would mean. And that's, and the thing is that, everybody went, well, but what about the tax cuts? And it turned into another one of those arguments. But it doesn't seem to me that the voters are buying it. If you look at polling and the way that they're sort of responding to this economy, they're giving Republicans a very tiny, within the margin of error, advantage in approval for running the economy, which seems odd to me. We're 2 years in. Trump should be able to take, some credit for all this, and they're really not getting it. And they're not getting, they're not doing well with their tax cuts. I mean, and that they are afraid of what's happening with the healthcare business because they're all lying like rugs in all their ads, saying that they're going to protect pre-existing conditions when they're the people who all voted to repeal Obamacare.
And all those state races, we there's a slew of governors' races where you see candidates talking about that, and their own attorney generals have joined a lawsuit to literally strip from the ACA things like covering pre-existing conditions and all of the other patient protection aspects of the Affordable Care Act. All right, well, listen, Digby, we're going to take a quick break, but I want to talk about something that is that probably does not have much in terms of implications for the midterms, but it certainly will could in 2020, and that is Elizabeth Warren this week came out with an announcement that in many respects has, I don't know, I want to get your take on it. And we will examine that when we come back. Plus, we also have to touch on the other implications about these midterms, and it has to do with Robert Mueller. We'll be right back after this. I'm Sam Seder. This is Ring of Fire Radio. I'm talking to the great Digby.